It's been almost 3 years since Kazuha was first playable in Genshin Impact. At his release, he was looked down upon, with players just calling him a second Sucrose and how he didn't offer much of anything more than that. Little did we know, because let's be honest, most of us didn't, that would be more of a compliment than an insult. But fast forward 3 years later, how does he hold up? Did the introduction of Dendro and Farina completely phase him out? Welcome to After the Peak, where I'd take old characters that had some time to simmer and review them in the present state of the game. Kaedehara Kazuha, released in version 1.6, just shy of the launch of Inazuma, was widely liked by casual players, but with that came under extremely uninformed negative criticism by the side of the player base that didn't know all of what the fuck they were talking about when it came to the combat system. Or just didn't care all that much for his aesthetic and character. I am in that second camp, for the record. He would be rerun a year later, but in the time between, players would find out about how good being a quote-unquote second Sucrose would be. Those that had him were swirling enemies with style, while those that didn't would just cry. Just as a note, a good chunk of this video will be comparing Kazuha to Sucrose, since that was the primary point of discussion at his launch. To begin with, they do similar things. They both have an elemental skill that does damage and crowd controls, and an elemental burst that would do AoE damage for a few seconds. So then, what was the difference? I mean, there's the difference of Kazuha wielding a sword where Sucrose used the catalyst, which is a huge difference already, positive and negative, but besides that, what difference was there? The difference is more apparent when you look at their passive abilities. Sucrose's passives would give your party a boost to their elemental mastery stat whenever you hit a swirl with her A1, or skill and burst with her A4. Kazuha's 4th Ascension passive would give your party an elemental damage buff whenever he triggers a swirl. Very similar, right? And that's exactly where some confusion stems from. At base forms, they sounded very similar to the other, which had people questioning how Kazuha benefited their accounts when you had all these rumors going around about Ayaka or the Electro Archon at the time. What further solidified this opinion was that Venti was still on top of his game at the time as one of the best characters given the enemies you had to fight against. So the players that had Venti had even less of a reason to get Kazuha. What changed? Not that much in-game, but when it comes to the player base, Kazuha basically awakened a whole new generation of theory crafters. For the players that cared about Spiral Abyss, that boiled down to, hey, so that OP animal character, why not just have two? Okay, that's not entirely true. Kazuha and Sucrose have similar sounding abilities. Not exactly the same, or else why would Hoyo make two of the same character? Sucrose buffs elemental mastery, whereas Kazuha buffs elemental damage bonus. Alright, so what's the big deal? Elemental damage bonus works with every swirlable element, whereas elemental mastery is useless in mono element or freeze teams. Strictly speaking, Sucrose is better than C0 Kazuha in a lot of cases. Being a catalyst user can help her with this too. If you're using her on field, being able to apply anima with every attack she does means that you get more swirls, which leads to more damage. On top of that, since she gives a party-wide elemental mastery buff with her skill regardless of elements, Dendro benefits from it too. Otherwise, Dendro can't be swirled. So Kazuha only mostly overshadows her with his C2, giving him and the on-field character a 200 EM buff after he uses his burst. For the average player though, the biggest deciding factor between the two of them is how easy they are to play. While Sucrose can offer similar levels of damage, almost to the point where Kazuha can just be a whatever pull, she's just harder to use. From having to consider that Catalyst characters are usually more squishy, to Genshin's innate auto-targeting that can make you hit the wrong enemy. Kazuha, on the other hand, is a sword user, and while there is a degree of auto-targeting with every weapon type in the game, his skill's crowd control ability doesn't. Wherever Kazuha is will be where the enemies are pulled to, but it's also just a stronger pull to begin with. What Sucrose has can only be called a light breeze compared to Kazuha's grouping ability. Outside of Sucrose, the only other character that followed and most traditional role was Venti. Venti was the reigning king of animal support since the game hadn't developed much in that time. Venti could crowd control basically every enemy unless it was a boss or a ruin type enemy at the time. Which is also saying that Venti is old. It was when Kazuha released that the devs were putting the game through a transition period. Kazuha just happened to be the marker. With Inazuma not being so far away from his announcement and launch, that meant new enemies and new enemy types were being introduced to the game. With how much of the game you could break just by using Venti, I'm assuming Hoyo wanted to be more careful with what their characters could do. A lot of heavy enemies appeared more often or were even introduced to counter Venti's Wind Grand Ode. Just by enemies being too heavy, that killed most of Venti's inherent power, because besides the black hole of his burst, he doesn't have much else to go off of in terms of combat. He would become a character that just does swirl damage with no other support ability. Kazuha would make that a slightly lesser issue. Even though Kazuha can't lift enemies like Venti can, he would still be able to suck in enemies and group them, even if it's ever so slightly. On top of that, Kazuha has more going for him over Venti with his passive. So all this to say that Venti pretty much fell off for anything that's of equal difficulty to everything past floor 10 of Spiral Abyss. Outside of Sucrose and Venti, how does Kazuha hold up nowadays? He is still fantastic. I mean, what'd you expect? With Dendro came the much needed power upgrade for the Electro element, as before that, Electro's elemental reactions were less than subpar. The reason I'm mentioning this is because along with Electro getting buffed, Kazuha got another element to support, and with how his burst works, you can trigger an insane amount of aggravates. Not just that, he can also work as a Burgeon trigger. By bringing him with Bennett, you can swirl Pyro from Bennett's inspiration field, and since you're already building Kazuha with a lot of EM, his Burgeon triggers will do insane numbers. Not to completely gas him up for more than he's worth, because there are a few cases where Kazuha isn't particularly the best choice. What are those? Farina teams. Yeah, this is where Kazuha's reign over Swirl is less dominant. Since Farina needs your team's HP status to change a lot for her to get more fanfare stacks, Kazuha is less useful in this scenario since he can't heal. Because of this, Jean or Shen Yun are better animal picks, even if you're not using Shen Yun for her plunging attack buff. Although, because of those two factors, he lost some of his previous value as one of the best characters in the game. But Kazuha is definitely one of the hardest characters to completely phase out due to how much value he offers for any account that has him. If the enemies are immune to Animo, well, his ability to swirl isn't affected by that. Grouping enemies? Kazuha's got a vacuum effect that sucks them in. You want to boost your damage for basically free? His passive buffs elemental damage bonus, and he can use the Viridescent Venerer 4-piece effect to reduce the elemental resistance of enemies. You like Rurouni Kenshin? Well, he's literally Kazuha will always have some relevance in the game so long as Hoyo keeps the difficult content in the game based on damage checks. It was for these reasons that Kazuha's held his place as one of the most valuable 5-star characters you can pull. We've gone through all the positives and negatives, so where does that leave Kazuha? Is he still one of the best 5 stars in the game? Of course he is! He's got some kind of universal utility no matter what team you slot him into. His playstyle and animations might not be for everyone. In fact, probably the worst thing about him is that he makes you temporarily blind and disoriented during his burst, because, my god, you can't see anything. Rest assured though, he is still one of the best 5-star characters to pull for in terms of ease of use, flexibility, and results. But remember, have fun with the game, because it's not that hard. And that's been After the Peak. Thanks for watching.